A man stares at his phone, thumb hovering over the meeting invite. His pulse is already rising at the thought of standing in front of a dozen quiet faces. He types out a polite excuse and hits send before he can second-guess himself. The moment the message leaves his hand, a wave of relief floods through his chest. That relief feels like proof that he just made the right decision. He leans back and notices how much lighter his whole body suddenly feels. The next time a speaking opportunity appears, something strange has happened. The fear arrives faster than it did before, and the urge to escape feels even stronger. He cannot understand why the danger feels more real when the only thing that changed was his successful escape from it. The relief had never been a signal of safety. It was the first quiet click of a trap that he was building with his own careful steps. The obvious answer is that avoiding what scares you should protect you from fear, and yet the fear has only grown. Psychologists call this process avoidance, and it works by a logic more surprising than simple cowardice. Avoidance is any action you take to prevent contact with something that triggers distress, and it can be physical, like leaving a room, or mental, like forcing a thought away. The immediate effect feels almost medicinal. Anxiety drops, muscles soften, and the world seems to settle back into a manageable shape. That drop of discomfort is a powerful teacher because your brain registers the escape as a reward. In the language of learning, a behavior that removes something unpleasant gets reinforced, a process called negative reinforcement. The word negative does not mean bad. Here, it means subtraction. Something uncomfortable is subtracted from your experience. You learned that pressing a button stopped a loud noise, and now you will press that button every time. The problem is not what happens in the moment of escape, but what happens to the fear itself when nothing new is ever learned. Fear is not a solid object that stays frozen once you turn your back on it. Fear is a living prediction, an expectation that a cataclysm is about to occur, and predictions need fresh information to update. When you avoid a situation, you never collect the one piece of data that could correct the prediction. You never learn that standing in front of quiet faces, even with a shaking voice, does not actually lead to public humiliation or permanent ruin. The brain simply keeps the fear file open, and every successful escape convinces it that the danger must have been real, because why else would you have run? This is the invisible engine of stronger fear, the belief that you survived only because you escaped, not because the threat was exaggerated from the start. The man did not just miss one meeting, he reinforced a story in which he cannot cope, and the story gains authority each time he follows it. Avoidance quietly shuts down what psychologists call extinction learning, the natural process by which a fear response shrinks when the feared outcome repeatedly fails to happen. Extinction does not erase the old fear memory, but it builds a new memory that says the old warning signal is no longer accurate, and that new memory can only grow through direct experience. The man's relief, which felt so true, was actually the thief that stole his chance to discover his own ability to endure discomfort. Consider what happens inside a simple fear before avoidance enters the picture. Imagine a child who hears a loud bark and then sees a harmless dog wagging its tail. The initial startle fades naturally once the child's brain matches the bark with a friendly animal, and the fear prediction updates immediately. Now imagine the child runs inside every time a dog appears. The brain never receives the contradictory evidence, and the startle remains frozen as a permanent threat that can grow into a full-blown phobia. The mechanism is not mysterious. It is the exact opposite of how we safely learn to navigate a world full of uncertain signals. A fire alarm that sounds only to be followed by smoke loses its power to warn, because the prediction is disconfirmed. A fire alarm that everyone always runs from without looking for fire teaches everyone to panic harder at the sound itself. The man's avoidance did not just preserve his fear of public speaking. It gradually expanded the territory of what he considered too dangerous to attempt. First, it was the large meeting, then a small team huddle, then even a casual question over lunch felt like a tightrope he could not cross. The brain generalizes fear to similar situations, a process called stimulus generalization, and avoidance accelerates that widening circle. Every new retreat confirms that the safe zone is shrinking because safety becomes defined entirely by the absence of discomfort. Psychologists have observed this pattern across countless fears, from social anxiety to panic to specific phobias, and the treatment consistently points toward one uncomfortable truth. The path out almost always requires walking directly into the feared situation and staying long enough for the prediction to fail. This is the principle behind exposure therapy, one of the most robustly supported tools in clinical psychology. Exposure is not about white-knuckling through terror until you collapse. It is about designing carefully graded experiences that disprove a catastrophic expectation. Someone afraid of dogs might first look at a picture, then stand across a field from a calm dog on a leash, then eventually offer a treat, all while the brain collects a mountain of evidence that nothing terrible follows. The same principle scaled to the man's fear would mean speaking for 30 seconds to one trusted colleague, not fleeing, and noticing the actual outcome instead of the imagined catastrophe. But there is a complication that makes the story more difficult than just choosing to be brave. Anxiety does not only produce fear, it frequently produces physical sensations, a racing heart, dizziness, tightness in the chest, that feel like proof that something is dangerously wrong. When you avoid, you also avoid learning that those sensations, however uncomfortable, are not dangerous in themselves. You miss the lesson that a pounding heart during a presentation is not a heart attack, and that shaky hands do not mean you are losing control completely. Many people mistake intense physical arousal for evidence that the feared outcome is imminent, and every avoidance act entrenches that misinterpretation. The trap deepens because avoidance is not passive. It often comes dressed as productivity or politeness. You reorganize your schedule, over-prepare for smaller tasks, create perfect conditions that never arrive, and call the whole strategy being responsible. The man genuinely believed he was preserving his professional reputation by not stuttering in front of his team, but his reputation was quietly freezing into a shape he never chose. The harder truth is that temporary relief can become a more addictive reward than the genuine confidence that grows slowly through repeated facing. A single avoided event teaches nothing, but 10 avoided events teach a terrifying syllabus that the mind never stops studying. There is a paradox at the center of the entire pattern, and it is one that can feel almost cruel. The very mechanism that should keep you safe, the protective urge to withdraw from danger, becomes the architect of stronger danger. The man was not weak because he felt relief after canceling his talk. His brain was doing exactly what brains evolved to do. It was avoiding a predicted threat. The evolutionary logic that kept our ancestors alive by steering them away from lions cannot distinguish between a lion and a social judgment. The brain responds to both threats with the same ancient command: escape now and think later, and it never gets the later thinking if you never go back. What changes everything is the realization that anxiety is not a weakness of character, but a prediction error that can be updated only through carefully collected contradictory data. The man believed that his fear showed him something true about the danger in the room, but the fear was far more about what he had never allowed himself to disprove. Every time he said no, he built a little more evidence for a disaster that was always only a hypothesis, never a fact. The central reversal is this: avoidance does not protect you from fear. It is the primary nutrient that feeds fear until it grows large enough to take over your decisions. The very act of running convinces the deepest learning systems in your brain that the thing you ran from must have been a mortal threat. Because why else would a rational organism expend so much energy to flee? The man had been asking the wrong question all along. Not can I handle this, but can I handle the relief of avoiding it? And the answer to the second question was slowly stealing his freedom. Now return to that moment when his thumb hovered over the phone. The relief that flooded him was real, but its meaning was not safety. It was the quiet closing of a door that would be harder to open every time he locked it. The fear that arrived faster the next week was not a sign that the monster had grown teeth while he slept, but that his own escape had taught the monster that it could keep him away. His mind had become a museum curated entirely by the things he never permitted himself to touch. The climax of this discovery is not a dramatic confrontation with a visible enemy. It is a slow, quiet recognition that the cage has no lock except the belief that standing still inside the danger is more dangerous than the lifelong cost of running. The man had been trying to protect himself, and in doing so, he had become the one who made the world smaller, not the people whose judgment he feared. He realized that the catastrophe he had rehearsed 1,000 times, the public collapse of his very self, had never occurred, not because he avoided it, but because the catastrophe was never the most likely outcome. The only thing that had ever truly collapsed was the open space of his own life, one polite excuse at a time. What he understood now, in a way he could not have felt through any lecture, is that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to let the fear predictions fail. The fear predicts you will shatter, and then you do not shatter, and then the fear, not you, is the thing that begins to change shape. This is not a fairy tale in which one brave act transforms someone into a fearless speaker overnight. It is the much truer story in which a human being finally gives their brain the evidence it needed all along to learn that safety is possible in the presence of a shaking voice. The man signed up for a short presentation the following week, not without terror, but with a new question in his mind: what actually happens if I stay? His heart still pounded when he stood up, his hands still felt unsteady, and his voice quivered on the first sentence. The difference was that he did not send an excuse. He did not flee the moment the discomfort crested, and he watched the room instead of the disaster movie in his head. A few people nodded. Someone asked a question, and the world did not collapse around him. Afterwards, a colleague mentioned an interesting point he had made, and the comment was so ordinary that it took a moment for the man to realize that ordinariness was the whole gift. His brain registered a tiny but vital piece of contradictory information: exposure, failure of prediction, safety. One successful step does not delete years of avoidance learning, but it cracks open a door that had been sealed by the strength of his own relief. The hard truth about avoidance is that it always tells a comforting lie in a moment of vulnerability. It whispers that you can stay safe by staying away, when in fact the only lasting safety is built through repeated, manageable encounters with the very thing you fear. Psychologists have a phrase for what the man experienced during that small talk. It is called a corrective experience, and it is not magic, just the patient work of letting a bad prediction run into reality. Not every attempt will go smoothly, and the brain may still sometimes scream at you to run, but every time you stay, you deposit one small coin into the bank of evidence that you can cope. The avoidance habit loses its grip not when you stop being anxious, but when you start teaching your anxiety that it is giving you outdated information. The man still feels the old tug when a larger audience is mentioned, but the tug is now accompanied by a second voice that remembers staying and not perishing. He returns to the memory of that first hover of his thumb, and he sees it now not as a moment of weakness, but as a beginning of understanding. The relief he felt was the beginning of the trap, and the anxiety he felt later was the trap's result, not his destiny. The fear that avoidance quietly strengthens can also be quietly starved, one hard, held, and completed moment at a time.